Hey, folks, welcome back to Unfinished Business Deep Dive. And this episode, we bring you a movie where we take a particular look in and try to dissect or tell our memories and review of it. You know, from when we first saw it to now. And this week's episode, we are going to talk about The Truman Show, which is actually Andre Joseph, my co-host pick of AJ Epics Productions. And Andre, tell us, why did you pick The Truman Show?
I was a huge Jim Carrey fan with Ace Ventura and The Mask and Dumb and Dumber. And me and my cousin were doing all those impressions, even going as far back as when he was on Living Color. So it was kind of a big deal to see him doing like suddenly a serious dramatic role where he's not talking out of his ass, you know? And I love this movie. It's so subversive. It is a film that you keep going back to, you find something new every time you see it. And, I've studied it in class. I've seen, YouTube videos about all the little Easter eggs that you may have missed if you didn't see it the first time. And it's just, even now, after a good 20 some odd years since it came out, I still think about it. Like, even today, with how people use TikTok and Instagram to, make their lives look bigger than they really are and make themselves into celebrities. And yet here's a movie that was sort of like paving the way on all that and showing it in a very troubling light, even though it's kind of like a sci-fi dramatic comedy. It's just a brilliant film, and it's up there as one of my favorites of all time.
Wow. I remember The Truman Show. I did see it in theaters. I wasn't as big of a Jim Carrey fan, but I liked the premise and I thought it was interesting. And I remember at the time, well, for those of us who are film geeks and in the know, the biggest thing was that Ed Harris was a last-minute replacement because Dennis Hopper was supposed to play the role of Christoph, and then he just quit on day one. So it was like, wow, what happened there? And I think Dennis Hopper would have been good, but it would not have been the same type of performance that Ed Harris gives off. Right. I agree. I love this film. I have really no problems with this movie. There's only one thing that bothers me a little, and that is maybe the Christoph character, how pretentious he is. But I think that's what works for the movie, because again, he feels like or thinks that he is God and acts that way throughout the movie. And I appreciated how inventive the film stayed, even though it reminded me, I guess, of a Twilight Zone episode from the 80s with David Naughton. And actually, after this movie, there is a thing called Truman Show disease, where people really do think that they are on a reality show constantly. But this film, like, way better than Ed TV, first of all, which was a similar a movie that came out that same year. I mean, Jim Carrey perfectly fits the character because, again, he's so animated, but he's playing normal, but he can do the improv of still being funny without, like, putting on a show, so to speak. And I feel like this role showed so much depth and just all the surreal images, like especially at the end when he reaches literally the end of the studio and it looks like a vast ocean. I'm just like, this film is just like stunning. And I mean, it was probably one of the biggest roles for Saffron Burrows, who, followed up.
Burrows, wasn't it?
Then who played the love interest, who was the forbidden love interest?
That was Natasha McLeone. I can't remember her last name. She was in The Devil's Own. She was on Californication.
I am losing all geek credit here.
Actress.
Okay, yeah. I'm losing all geek credit here. Sorry, it's the wrong actress. But also, she's worked, but you don't see her as much. Like, this was supposed to be, her big ticket to stardom. Obviously, Laura Linney got plenty of work after this.
Oh, yeah. This made her career, I think.
Yeah. I mean, at least she has, like, now Ozark, so she's constantly working. Ed Harris, obviously, who got nominated for this film. And somebody, a person people don't give respect on his name enough to, Peter Weir, man. This is a guy.
Peter Weir.
He is an amazing director. All of his films surreal, all of them individual and distinct. And really, I haven't really seen him make a movie since Master and Commander with Russell Crowe and Paul Bettany. A movie I actually really liked. And I'm not the biggest Russell Crowe movie fan. So I was just like, oh man, Peter Weir, even though supposedly at first he didn't get along with Jim Carrey because of his more improv nature, but then found a way to make it work. I don't know what happened between him and Dennis Hopper, And it's interesting because Peter Weir not obviously, but wasn't the first choice to direct this film. It was Andrew Niccol had it in his contract that upon selling the screenplay, he would be able to direct it. But obviously, the studio doesn't want to trust, somebody who's never directed before with an $80 million budget. And they even let him shoot a scene from his original screenplay, which was much darker.
Yeah, it was like sci-fi thriller, like the stuff he would end up directing, like In Time and Gattaca.
Gattaca, but In Time, less better. But Gary Oldman, who he originally wanted to star in this film, playing it, where he threatens to kill this woman's baby unless she tells him the truth. And obviously the studio's like, no. So they actually almost got Brian De Palma to sign on to direct the film. But he decided to leave his agency and the studio. And so he directed instead one of the films we'll be talking about on a future episode of Deep Dive Snake Eyes. Instead, wonder how that turned out. So, this film, I mean, it's hard to say anything bad about this movie. It has just the right measure of everything to make it memorable, to make it cutesy. I will even go so far as to say, next to Liar Liar, this might be my favorite Jim Carrey movie. Yeah. I mean, I can't really think of too much more to say about this movie other than the love fest we have going for it.
Oh, there's plenty, because this is a deep dive. I mean, there's so much that is obviously trivial about the making of the film, and Jim Carrey actually took a pay cut to do it. He was normally getting 20 million at that time. He took this for 12 million because he just believed in the script so much. But the thing about it too is, so if you've seen the movie, the first half of it plays from his point of view. Like, he's literally little by little finding out these things, that his world is not reality, that it's clearly a TV show. And then it's not till like maybe the second half where you start to see the inner workings of what they're trying to do to steer his life towards having a kid so the kid could become the next star of the show. And then, the little third act twist that goes on there. But what's really fascinating is if you watch the deleted scenes, and you can find them on YouTube, it tells you this would have been a way different movie with more things that they would have shown behind the scenes, like the other characters that he was interacting with, what they were really like when the cameras weren't on them, particularly what's his name, Noah Emmerich. Yeah, he plays Marlon, his best friend. There's supposedly Peter Weir wrote a whole book full of everybody's backstories in this film, and his character in particular, Noah Emmerich, like he was like a child star with drug problems or went to rehab, and he's like the only one out of anybody that felt guilty for constantly having to lie to Truman about, hey, everything's real, everything's okay, I would never lie to you about things that are happening. But he's feeling so guilty. There was actually a scene that either was shot or not, where as they were looking for him when he disappears, he does spot him in the darkness and says nothing. He just lets him go. So there were those little bits of character traits that would have made the movie a lot more interesting, even though it works as is right now. but those other elements, even more clues to, you know, Truman finding out what was happening in his life. Like they had this one guy extra that shows up as a homeless man who takes a piece of food from him, and then he sees this guy again as just a regular pedestrian. It's like, wait, I saw you like yesterday as a homeless man. What? How'd you get rich all of a sudden? So, you know, there were those things, and then there's also, and I'm going real deep with this, but like the more you watch it, the more you start to think about the outside aspects of this film that you don't see. Like Christoph, for example, he's just as trapped as Truman. You know, he is pretty much having to run this show 24/7. He barely ever sleeps. He's not married. He doesn't have kids. So while Truman is living this fantasy life that he's creating, that he's manipulating, Christoph really doesn't have anything else going on. And yet he's rich and powerful, but he's got to be like a shell of a person that, you know, only sees Truman as like the kid he never had. And that is pretty damn twisted. And I think that's why Ed Harris works here compared to whatever Hopper was going to do, because he really comes off as like this genuine father figure who really has a twisted sense of being a parent to this guy.
Well, the one scene where I feel like what you're talking about comes through, and maybe this is why they cut all the other scenes, is when Truman gets on the bus to go out of town, and the bus driver doesn't really know what to do because he doesn't even know how to drive the bus. You know, I felt like even with just those few seconds, that told you kind of everything you really needed to know about maybe some of these background actors or extras in the show within the film. You get what I'm saying. You know, but you know, like I said, it's just like that is the genius of this movie. There aren't that many flaws with this movie because, like you said, it's one of those films you have to keep going back and watching, and you see so much more, or more is revealed to you the more you watch it. And it's a film that I think everybody knows, but nobody really speaks of in such a high quality. You know, it's like, oh yeah, I've seen the Truman Show, or yeah, I know what that's about, but nobody, you never hear anything like, yo man, that movie was mind blowing. You know, as you would maybe some other like more recent modern classics. You know, and I just feel like this film never.
That's a big reason. Yeah.
I just feel like this movie never really got its flowers, so to speak. You know.
Yeah, Jim Carrey won a Golden Globe, but they didn't nominate him for the Oscar, which was such bullshit. And then he got snubbed for Man on the Moon after that.
Luckily for him, awards never meant anything to him, or at least not now.
Not today. No, he's a totally different man.
Exactly. But, you know, I wish, like, this is the rare case of a studio taking a spec script and truly making something original that's well remembered and well made. You know, and it doesn't feel derivative of too many other things people have seen, you know. And, you know, even in 1998, that was a rarity, you know.
Yeah. I would even go as far as to say, you know, even in this day and age where everybody's trying to do a remake or a sequel, this film does not need a sequel at all. I think it ends perfectly. I understand in the original script, there was actually supposed to be another scene where you saw what happened after he walks out the door. He was supposed to go onto the roof of the dome, and Christoph and some of the other crew members were right there to maybe try to make one more attempt to stop him from leaving. And he sees Christoph and he lashes at him. So he actually starts punching and wailing at him, and then the crew pulls him apart. And then the Sylvia character shows up and he walks away with her. But even that ending still makes me think, because I have to imagine, like, now he's been living in this bubble for 30 years, and that's the only life that he knows. They make it seem like it's this happy ending, but it really isn't, because when he gets out, you're thinking to yourself, okay, the first time you see it, he's going to be with the girl that he wants to be with, and he's going to travel the world. He's going to do what he wants to do. but there's that other like sort of dark, sinister side of it where like this guy is not going to have privacy because you can imagine the media in that future hounding him 24/7 and having to adjust to the way the world actually is versus what was created for him, because the world Christoph created was like sort of like a quasi 1950s suburban lifestyle and no real pop music or anything that's like derogatory or offensive. The worst thing is just there's homeless people on the street. There's nothing, nobody's getting killed or any serious crimes going on. But for a guy like Truman who's lived that life and you're 30 years old living in the real world, it's a rude awakening that makes you wonder, would he actually go back into the bubble after all that? So these conversations that I like to have, because I don't want to see it play out in an actual movie. I like to have that guessing game go on. And that's why I think people still talk about this movie after all this time.
Well, I like the ending they went with because, the I guess, filmed ending that they didn't use, I don't think would have been as satisfying. It would have been a little too melodramatic.
Yeah.
And I like the way it ends because, again, there is always that question mark as to now what? And, like, even if he went outside, it's like, well, he has no social security number. He has no savings. How's he going to get by in the world? And then he'd learn, the cruelties of life. And, and depending who you got to write and direct, if there was a sequel, this could either be a fish out of water comedy a la Blast from the Past, or this could be, a hard hitting, mind bender drama. But again, it's something that is better left to the viewer to decide and imagine their own future for the character rather than, let me dictate what happened, so.
It shocks me this is not a Philip K. Dick novel because it has all the traits of one. And definitely, even at the end, it reminded me of Total Recall, like when Schwarzenegger kisses the girl and the scene turns to white and they make you guess, was the whole movie a dream or was it actually going on? And if it is a dream, is he going to wake up and be lobotomized? Like it keeps you guessing, but okay, it's a Schwarzenegger movie, so we got to expect he'll be all right. Here, you're not really sure. I mean, they play it like it's a happy-go-lucky ending because it's Jim Carrey and, nothing bad ever really happens with him in those movies back then. But then you really think about it, yeah, like you just said, the guy has no identity, no social security, no insurance. So that's all going to be handed to him because he just walked out the dome after 30 years. I mean, these are questions I actually don't want to have answered. I'd rather continue to guess about that.
Well, unfortunately, it was not a Philip K. Dick. It was an Andrew Niccol. And if he had written the novel, it would have been hella dark and maybe not as beloved. But through the 15 drafts of this script, supposedly he had to write, and not to mention improv and Peter Weir's input, we got the story the way it was. And it comes off best for all involved, Because, again, even with the dark version, it might not have caught the audience's love of, the character because again, it would be so dark, so that at best it might have just been a big studio cult item. Whereas this, it makes the audience think, but it can also be beloved by audiences also. So, that is one of the good traits of this film. And this is why I'm sure there's some detractors, but I'd be hard pressed to find somebody who's like, I fucking hated this movie.
Well, nobody stands out. No.
Yeah, because I'm just like, again, I can honestly say there's no weak links here. There's nobody who you're like, oh, they could have cast somebody different. And I know of course, since it's sci-fi, even Tim Burton was in the running to direct this. Mm-hmm. And as always, Spielberg hinted at maybe wanting to direct and didn't do it. Even though it comes off a little Spielbergian, but luckily, no offense to him. He is a great director. But again, I think it works well with Peter Weir, also who isn't, an American television veteran, because he's Australian, So, it's good that it's almost like looking at American culture through different eyes than somebody who was born here. And, so
And I also think that Peter Weir is one of those rare talents that could bring the best out of any actor. You see it with Harrison Ford, A Witness, and Mosquito Coast. You see it with Robin Williams and Ted Poets Society. Like, he could take these guys that do like normally like these popcorn flicks and stay in their bubble. He gets them out of the bubble, and they deliver a performance that, to be honest, is better than anything that's in their filmography.
Well, I think that's because he makes films. I mean, everybody's good all around, but he makes films for actors who are stars, or brings out the actor in a star more than, brings out, makes a actor a star. So I think that works in his favor. And also, he tends to take stuff or material that could be seen as boring, and he makes it riveting somehow. Like, initially you might hear the plot lines of some of these movies, like The Mosquito Coast or Witness, and be like, I don't know if I want to sit through that. But you get so enveloped watching it through the characters and through the filmmaking that it actually becomes exciting on its own. And that's like a quality all the best directors have, And again, he's a guy who he's a director who doesn't really get mentioned out there as much as other people. I don't know. Maybe he'll be like Adrian Lin, where it's like, hey, I haven't seen a film from Peter Weir in a while. Wonder what happened to him, or an Alan Parker, but Alan Parker was more of a workhorse. So,
and he's dead.
Well, now it's at least Peter Weir's still alive. Peter Weir's gonna call you and be like, "What are you trying to say?" And, he's like, "I'm not."
To call me. Why not?
Hey, he can call any of us. We are free and love to interview him. See what he's up to. Is there anything else you want to say about the Truman Show?
No, it's just a solid film, well cast. Effects were great for the time, and like I said, it's still worth watching. And if you're lucky to watch the movie in college and do a class on it, it's worth it. There's really a lot more you can find out that you don't know when you first see it.
Well, that'll do it. We obviously love this movie. And please let us know in the comments. Tell us what you think of this movie. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Why or why not? We'd love to hear from you. And that'll do, Pig. That'll be the end of this episode. And we will see you next time with our next deep dive. Will it be a love fest? Will it be a hate fest? Will it be a mix fest? You'll have to keep watching and see.